I bought a house for my parents, but I found out they gave it to my favorite sister. A family betrayal that exposed decades of unfair preferences and painful secrets. Amid unrecognized sacrifices and undeserved privileges, a journey of self-discovery, and courage reveals truths that no one was prepared to face. A story about self-worth, family boundaries, and the pursuit of justice. Prepare to question. How far would you go for someone who wouldn't do the same for you? Leave a like and tell us in the comments if you've ever experienced something similar. Betrayal. 45. After saving every penny for 15 years, I finally managed to buy a house for my elderly parents to get out of renting. What seemed like the most rewarding moment of my life turned into the deepest disappointment I'd ever experienced. Imagine my surprise when, just 3 months later, I discovered they transferred the deed to my younger sister, Ashley, the perfect daughter of the family. The justification? She needs it more than you, son. She has young children and just got separated. My father's voice still echoes in my mind, with that tone that admits no argument. Eyes fixed on his coffee cup, unable to look me in the eye. My mother, beside him, just nodded, her hands trembling in her lap. What no one knows is that I sacrificed my own dream of owning property to give this gift to my parents. I postponed marriage, children, travel. And now, everything I built was handed on a silver platter to someone who always had things made easy in life. In the following nights, sleep became an unattainable luxury. The numbers kept spinning in my head. 15 years saving approximately 30% of my salary every month, penny by penny, giving up small pleasures, new clothes, a better car, all to see my parents, already in their 70s, finally free from the burden of rent. In my naivety, I believed they would value this. What a fool I was. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, but the casualness with which it happened. As if it were obvious that my sacrifice was worth less than Ashley's needs. As if it were my obligation to give up my dreams for hers. It had always been like this since we were kids. She, 5 years younger, always got everything she wanted with a simple smile or a well-placed tear. In the small town of Harmony Creek, upstate New York, where we grew up, everyone knows everyone. Family traditions are sacred, and the family name still carries weight in community relations. It didn't take long for the comments to start. In the supermarket lines, at gatherings after Sunday service, at the town picnics that liven up the town square. Mike is a good son, isn't he? He gave a house to his parents and even let his sister have it. The official version, carefully constructed, turned me into the selfless son, almost a saint. The reality? I wasn't even consulted. When I finally mustered the courage to confront my parents about the house transfer, the answer came loaded with that folk wisdom that always served to justify injustices. In the family, everything belongs to everyone, my mother said as she chopped vegetables for Sunday lunch. Whoever has more shares with whoever has less, my father completed, without taking his eyes off the newspaper. How could I explain to them that it wasn't about selfishness? That the problem wasn't helping my sister, but the way everything happened behind my back? Sunday family gatherings, once moments of joy and fellowship, became the stage for silent tensions. The aroma of chicken pot pie and mashed potatoes, a traditional dish my mother always prepared to unite the family, now made my throat tighten. We ate in silence, interrupted only by the lively stories of my nieces and nephews, oblivious to the emotional storm brewing around the table. My parents acted as if nothing had happened. Ashley avoided being alone with me, always surrounded by her children or busy with some household chore. I became a ghost in the house I once dreamed of giving as a gift, an intruder in the memories I helped build. Then came the final blow. During one of these gatherings, I unintentionally overheard a conversation between Ashley and her friend Sarah on the back porch. My sister was secretly planning to sell the house to open her own business, a beauty salon downtown. She didn't even intend to live there with her children as she had claimed to get the property. "It'll be perfect," she said between laughs. "I've always wanted to have my own business, and now this opportunity fell from the sky. As if 15 years of sacrifice could be summed up as a stroke of luck. I felt the blood boil in my veins, but I kept my composure. I needed concrete proof before making any accusations. When I tried to talk to my parents about it, they refused to believe me. "You're jealous of the affection we have for her," my mother said, hurt by my insinuation. "Your sister would never do that," my father defended. "She needs that house to raise the kids." Their selective blindness was astonishing. To complicate the situation even further, Jessica, my longtime girlfriend, with whom I could finally think about getting married now that I was free from the financial commitment to my parents, began to show signs of impatience with the whole situation. 8 years of relationship, postponing dreams, planning a future together. She always understood my priority in helping my parents, but she couldn't understand why I remained so loyal to a family that clearly didn't value my sacrifices. "You need to learn to set boundaries," she said in our last conversation at the town overlook, the same place where years ago we had promised to build our house someday. The sunset painted the sky orange and red. The city lights began to turn on below. A view that once filled us with hope was now the setting for the end. "I can't keep waiting for you to break free from this toxic dynamic. I have my own dreams. Mike." The text message arrived 3 days later. "I'm sorry, but I need to move on. You'll always choose your family above everything else, and I deserve to be a priority in someone's life. Be happy." Not even a call, a personal meeting. Years of relationship reduced to a few characters on the cell phone screen. Interesting how some have the audacity to talk about priorities via text message. I commented aloud to the empty apartment, laughing humorlessly as I poured another shot of cheap whiskey. Maybe she and Ashley should meet to discuss abandonment techniques. They could write a book, How to Leave Mike Souza Behind in 10 Simple Steps. At work, things also started to change. As an accountant for a mid-sized company, I had always been known for my loyalty, determination, and an almost stubborn sense of justice. These characteristics led me not only to save meticulously to fulfill the dream of getting my parents out of renting, but also to build a solid and respected career. Now, however, my concentration was compromised. Small mistakes, unusual for my usual standard, began to appear. Spreadsheets with swapped values, forgotten deadlines. It was at this moment that Robert, my boss and mentor for over a decade, called me in for a chat. I expected a warning, maybe even a veiled threat of dismissal. Instead, I received a promotion offer that would require me to move to the state capital. "We're expanding, Mike. We need someone with your experience and integrity to head the finance department of the new branch in Harrisburg." The significant salary increase could help me start over, far from the family wounds. I accepted without hesitation. The prospect of distance seemed the only possible solution to that constant pain. 3 weeks to organize the move, train my replacement, and say goodbye to this life I had built in Harmony Creek. 3 weeks to cut the ties that suffocated me. However, accepting would mean definitively abandoning the dream of having my parents close by in their old age, the reason that made me buy the house in the first place. It wasn't a decision made on impulse. It was a meticulous plan, thought out for years. The chosen land was just 2 blocks from the town square, allowing them to walk to church, the pharmacy, the market. A single-story house, without stairs, with discreet handrails in the hallways and an adapted bathroom. Every detail thought out for their comfort and safety in their advanced age. In the days that followed, I began preparing for the move. A meticulous inventory of belongings, documents organized into colored folders, calls to real estate agents in Harrisburg. The calculated coldness with which I conducted the entire process surprised even myself. It was as if another person inhabited my body, someone pragmatic and efficient, immune to emotional pain. It was during the town's annual Apple Blossom Festival, an event that marks the beginning of spring and brings the whole community together, that an unexpected encounter changed everything. Among stalls of typical sweets and local crafts, I bumped into Emily, an old schoolmate. I hadn't seen her for at least 2 decades, since she left to study law in the capital. Now, back in her hometown, she had opened a law office specializing in family law. "Mike Souza, time has been kind to you," she commented, with that smile I remembered from adolescence. Always direct, without beating around the bush. "I've heard some stories about you around here. Something about a house and a problematic sister." In any other circumstance, I would have brushed it off, kept up appearances as dictated by the unwritten code of small towns. But there was something in Emily's eyes, an understanding that went beyond casual curiosity. Before I knew it, we were sitting on a bench away from the crowd, and I was pouring out the whole story. She listened, attentively, without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small notebook she took from her purse. There are legal ways to contest this transfer, especially if it was done under emotional pressure, she explained when I finished. I'm not suggesting you get into a legal battle against your family, but knowing your rights can help you negotiate on equal footing. I don't want the house back, I replied, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. I just want them to understand what they did. I want them to see the consequences of their choices. Emily nodded, understanding what I couldn't fully express in words. It wasn't about the property itself, but about recognition, about justice in its most fundamental sense. Still, she insisted, you should check how that transfer was made. There might be irregularities that, at the very least, could prevent your sister from selling the property without your consent. I left the festival with a new purpose. The next day, instead of continuing with the preparations for the move, I went to the local county recorder's office. As an accountant, I knew how to navigate bureaucracy. I requested copies of all documents related to the property, from the original purchase to the transfer to Ashley. It was there, among yellowed papers and official stamps, that I discovered the first secret. The house my mother had inherited from her parents decades ago, the same house where we grew up and which was sold when I was only 12, wasn't lost due to financial difficulties, as they had always told me. It was sold to pay off my father's gambling debts, something that had always been hidden from me, but which Ashley apparently knew. The guilt over this episode began to partially explain the preferential treatment she had always received. The discovery was like a punch to the stomach, not only because of the lie maintained for so many years, but because of the sudden understanding that perhaps my obsession with buying a house for my parents had deeper roots than I myself recognized. I was, unconsciously, trying to fix something that had been broken long before, trying to restore a loss that marked our family, without even knowing its true nature. The following week, an unexpected storm caused a power outage throughout the town. Worried about my parents, I went to their house, the house I bought, to check if they were okay. I only found my father, alone on the porch, contemplating the rain by candlelight. My mother had gone to spend the weekend at a sister's house in a neighboring town. It was the first time we had been alone together in months. The silence between us, once loaded with hurt and resentment, felt different that night, lighter somehow. Maybe it was the darkness, which allowed us to talk without really looking at each other. Maybe it was just the weariness of keeping such high walls for so long. I found the documents for the sale of Grandma's house, I said finally, without accusation in my voice, just a statement of fact. My father sighed deeply. In the flickering candlelight, I could see how much he had aged in recent months. His shoulders hunched, his hands marked by time. Your grandfather made me promise on his deathbed that I would ensure your mother would never be without a home of her own, he confessed, his voice choked with emotion. I failed him, and now I'm afraid to leave this world without fulfilling that promise. Then why give the house to Ashley? I asked, genuinely confused. Because we thought you'd be okay without it. You have your job, your life organized. Ashley has always been more fragile, more dependent, needing more protection. He paused, struggling with the words. When you brought that deed, I thought I had finally fulfilled my promise, that your mother would be secure. Then Ashley showed up with the kids crying about the divorce, with nowhere to go. But you could have talked to me, I interrupted, feeling the old frustration return. We could have found another solution together. I know, he admitted, surprising me. We acted wrongly. It was always easier to give in to your sister's demands than to face the problems head on. It's an old pattern, son. That confession, simple, but honest, completely disarmed me. For the first time, I felt that my father truly saw me, not as the responsible and independent son who didn't need attention or care, but as someone who also had feelings, dreams, and needs. Meanwhile, Unbeknownst to me, Ashley was facing her own problems. The new relationship she had started shortly after the separation, with a businessman from the capital who frequently visited Harmony Creek, was beginning to show cracks. Brian, who initially encouraged her to accept the house, arguing that it was the least the family owed her after years of favoritism towards the successful brother, was proving increasingly interested in her assets than in building a life together. It was during the preparations for the town's annual Fall Festival, an event that mobilizes the entire community, that I ran into Kevin, my sister's ex-husband. We were helping set up the booths for the festival when he, after a few beers, began to vent about the divorce. Contrary to all the stories circulating in the family, he revealed that the separation was her initiative, not his as everyone believed. She met this guy, Brian, on one of her trips to visit her cousin in Philly, he explained, hammering a stake into the ground harder than necessary. 2 weeks later, she told me our marriage was over, that she deserved more out of life, that I was too simple for her ambitions. But what about the story about you abandoning her and the kids? I asked, astonished. Kevin laughed humorlessly. That was the version she told to gain the family's sympathy. In reality, she kicked me out of the house on a Sunday night. I had to sleep at the gas station where I work until I could rent a small room in the back of Mrs. Gable's house. He paused, looking directly at me. She always knew how to manipulate you all, the fragile daughter who needs constant protection. It's all a well-rehearsed act. That conversation opened my eyes to a pattern that deep down I always knew existed, but never wanted to admit. Ashley wasn't just the favorite daughter. She was a skilled manipulator who had built her life by exploiting the guilt and insecurities of others. The situation reached its peak 2 weeks later, during Sunday lunch. I noticed something was different as soon as I arrived. The table set with the best china, the wine reserved for special occasions, everyone dressed impeccably. Ashley and Brian sitting side by side, she with a nervous smile, he exuding artificial confidence. It was in the middle of dessert that she dropped the bomb. Mom, Dad, Mike, Brian and I have an announcement to make. We've decided to sell the house and open a restaurant in the capital. It will be a new beginning for us. The silence that followed was deafening. It was as if time had stopped. The clinking of silverware against plates, the chirping of birds in the backyard I helped plant, my father's heavy breathing, everything amplified by the tension that filled the room. Sell? My mother repeated, her voice almost inaudible. But we thought you needed the house to raise the kids, to start over after the divorce. Plans change, Mom, Ashley replied with a casual shrug. This is a unique opportunity. Brian knows the business, he has contacts. We need the capital to invest. It was at that moment that I saw understanding finally dawn on my parents. The extent of their mistake becoming painfully clear on their aging faces. My father, always so sure of his decisions, looked diminished, slumped in his chair as if an invisible weight was pushing him down. My mother, the eternal mediator, the family, peacemaker, couldn't find words to ease the situation. I felt no satisfaction at that scene, just a deep sadness for the lost time, the misunderstandings, the unnecessary pain. For a brief moment, I considered revealing right there everything I had discovered. Ashley's manipulation, the truth about her divorce, Brian's plans to use the sale money for his own benefit, information that Emily had helped me gather in recent weeks. It would be perfect revenge, a public exposure that would destroy the carefully constructed image of the perfect daughter. Instead, I calmly got up from the table. If you'll excuse me, I need to go. I have some errands before the move. I grabbed my coat, kissed my mother on the forehead, and headed for the door. Move? What move? My father asked, seeming to come out of a trance. I got a promotion. I'm moving to Harrisburg next week. The news, which was previously my secret, fell like an additional bomb on that already tense meeting. Good luck with the restaurant. I was almost at the door when a sudden memory made me stop. A piece of information I had discovered almost by chance during my research on the property. Oh, just one detail you should know before closing any deal, I commented, as if remembering something unimportant. I discovered through Old Town records, that the land where I built the house has historical value. It was part of one of the first apple orchards in the region, owned by the old Bartlett family. The town council is interested in preserving original buildings in that area, which could significantly complicate a sale. It wasn't exactly a lie. The land really was part of an old apple orchard, although I wasn't sure about the town council's interest in preserving it. But the look of panic on Brian's face was worth every word. In the days that followed, I didn't answer my parents' insistent calls. I needed space to process everything that had happened. The move to Harrisburg became my sole focus. A new apartment, a new routine, a new life. It was in the midst of these preparations that I received an unexpected visit from my mother. She looked like she had aged 10 years in just a few weeks. "I left your father," she announced as soon as she entered my almost empty apartment, boxes piled everywhere. After 48 years of marriage, I told him I no longer agree with his decisions, that I can't keep silent while he destroys our family with choices based on guilt and fear. She sat on the only sofa that hadn't been packed yet, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse unnecessarily tightly. "Ashley confessed everything," she continued, "about the divorce, about Brian, about the plans for the sale money. Your father still tries to justify it, to say she's confused, that she was influenced. I can't take it anymore." I poured her a glass of water, not knowing how to react to this sudden turn of events. Part of me wanted to hug her, to say everything would be okay. Another part, still wounded, maintained the emotional distance I had built as protection. "What are you going to do now?" I asked finally. "I don't know," she admitted, a sad smile playing on her lips. "I've never had to make big decisions alone. I've always been someone's wife, someone's mother. Maybe it's time to find out who Carol is behind all these roles." It was during the town's annual Memorial Day parade, an event that holds deep symbolic meaning for our community, that I finally confronted my parents with all the truths I had uncovered. Not by chance, I chose this moment to have our conversation. The parade, which runs through the main streets of Harmony Creek, represents remembrance and reflection. I found them on the steps of the town hall after the ceremony. My father, visibly deflated, held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. My mother, beside him but maintaining a symbolic distance, seemed calmer, almost serene. "I didn't come here to accuse you," I began, surprising myself with the calmness in my voice. "I don't want the house back. I'm not here to demand anything from you." "Then why?" my father asked, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. "I just want you to understand what you did. The choices you made didn't just affect me, but our whole family. You created a pattern where one daughter learned that manipulation is the way to get what she wants, and one son learned that his sacrifices will never be enough." My mother began to cry silently, but I didn't try to comfort her. It was necessary for them to feel the weight of their actions, not for revenge, but so that true transformation could occur. "I found out about Grandma's house," I continued, "about the promise to Grandpa. I understand the guilt, the fear of leaving without fulfilling a promise. But you used my love, my work, to resolve an emotional debt that was never mine to pay." "You're right," my father admitted to my surprise. I had never seen him acknowledge a mistake so directly. "I failed as a father when I allowed the problems of the past to determine how we treat our children in the present. Your mother tried to warn me several times, but He stopped, words failing him. "There's no excuse, son." The real challenge began when Ashley, confronted with her own manipulations, had to decide between maintaining appearances or admitting her mistakes. The local community, where everyone knows everyone, watched attentively this family drama unfolding at the heart of their traditions and celebrations. Brian disappeared as soon as he realized the quick sale plan wouldn't work. With him went the promises of a bright future away from Harmony Creek. Ashley suddenly found herself alone, facing not only the judgment of her family, but of the entire town. In a gesture that surprised her as much as it did me, it was Emily who reached out to help her. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she explained when I questioned her decision to offer Ashley a job in her office. "Your sister needs to learn to earn things on her own merit, not through emotional manipulation. The house, that house, that had been the epicenter of so much conflict, remained empty for a few months. Neither my parents, reconciled but still working through their issues with the help of a therapist in the next town, nor Ashley felt entitled to occupy it. Neighbors began to speculate about possible buyers, about the curse that seemed to have befallen the property. In the outcome of this year-and-a-half saga, there were no winners or losers, only imperfect people trying to rebuild ties damaged by unequal expectations and old secrets. The promotion in Harrisburg proved more challenging and rewarding than I could have imagined. The distance, which I initially sought as an escape, became a tool for perspective. One Sunday afternoon, almost 2 years after all the turmoil began, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Kevin, Ashley's ex-husband. "I know it sounds strange for me to call," he began, hesitant, "but I thought you'd want to know. Ashley and I we're talking again. The kids miss having the family together, and he paused. "She's different, more mature. She said she learned a lot from you and Emily." "I'm glad to hear that," I replied sincerely. The resentment that once dominated my thoughts had gradually dissipated, giving way to a deeper understanding of the complexity of family relationships. It was during this conversation that the idea arose that would eventually transform the end of this story into a new beginning. The house, still empty, could serve a greater purpose than our personal disputes. 3 months later, in a simple ceremony in the backyard of that same house, we gathered the whole family and close friends to inaugurate the Sousa Community Center. The old property, renovated and adapted, became a space to welcome seniors during the day, offering activities, meals, and companionship for those whose families work outside the home. My parents, now active volunteers at the center, found a new purpose in their old age. Ashley, reconciled with Kevin and working part-time at Emily's office, learned to value stability over excessive ambition. And I, between my regular trips from Harrisburg to Harmony Creek, discovered that family isn't just the one we're born into, but also the one we choose to build with honesty and mutual respect. The house that was once a symbol of betrayal and disappointment transformed into a monument to new beginnings. The wounds, although healed, left scars that reminded us daily of the importance of honesty and communication. When I look back at that Mike from 2 years ago, I barely recognize him. The bitter man, consumed by resentment and frustration, seems like a distant stranger. The path wasn't easy or linear. There were days when anger returned with full force, moments when I questioned my decisions, nights when sleep still fled at the memories. The transformation of the house into a community center wasn't just a practical solution for an abandoned property. It was a declaration of principles, a way of saying that some things are bigger than our personal disputes, that the common good can flourish even from the most arid terrains of family conflicts. "You were always the family peacemaker," my mother said once, as we organized a birthday party for Mrs. Gable, the oldest lady who attended the center. "Even when you were just a boy, you always tried to resolve fights, calm tempers." "Funny," I replied, placing the colorful cups on the decorated table. "I never saw myself that way. I always thought I was the excluded one, the different one, the one who never quite fit in." "That's because you saw beyond our limitations," she explained, with that wisdom that only years can bring. "You saw what we could be, not just what we were. That bothers people who prefer to remain in the comfort of their flaws." That conversation stayed with me for a long time, not out of vanity or late validation, but because it helped me understand that many of my sacrifices weren't imposed. They were choices based on values I had always carried. The difference now was that those choices would be made consciously, not out of obligation or guilt. Emily and I began to grow closer beyond professional matters. First, there were occasional coffees when I visited Harmony Creek, then long late-night calls, until the visits became more frequent and the reasons less related to family or the community center. "Your hands are always cold," she observed on our first official date, a dinner at the small Italian restaurant that had just opened on the town square. "They say it's a sign of a warm heart." "Oui, or poor circulation," I joked, still uncomfortable with compliments or personal observations. "Always the practical explanation, isn't it?" She smiled, her eyes reflecting the soft candlelight. "The accountant who analyzes everything by the Numbers. The numbers have never lied to me, I replied, more serious than I intended. People, on the other hand. People are more complex than spreadsheets, Mike. They have fears, insecurities, contradictions, including you. She touched my hand lightly. Maybe it's time to look beyond the balance sheets of debits and credits. It was a slow process. This relearning to trust. To understand that vulnerability isn't weakness. That asking for help doesn't diminish our competence. That loving again doesn't necessarily mean repeating the same mistakes. Emily, with her patience and characteristic frankness, became my partner in this journey. On one of my monthly visits to the community center, I found Kevin installing a small vegetable garden in the backyard. It was early spring, and the first seedlings of lettuce, carrots, and tomatoes were already sprouting in carefully marked beds. The kids had the idea, he explained, pointing to my nieces and nephews who were playing further on, filling small watering cans with water. They said the grandparents and the other people at the center needed real food without poison. He laughed. I think they're having a lot of lessons about healthy eating at school. We watched, together for a moment, the comfortable silence between us something new and precious. You know, he began, hesitant, I never properly thanked you. For what? For not telling the truth about our divorce to everyone. When you found out, you could have completely exposed Ashley, destroyed her image in town. It would have been fair after what she did. I reflected for a moment before answering. It wasn't really about fairness, or at least, not that kind of fairness that seeks punishment. I paused, organizing my thoughts. Publicly exposing Ashley would have satisfied my ego temporarily, but it wouldn't have healed anything. It would have just created more bitterness, especially for my nieces and nephews. Kevin nodded, understanding. The kids would have suffered more than anyone. Exactly. They weren't to blame for the choices of the adults around them. I adjusted my hat to protect myself from the sun that was beginning to get stronger. Besides, I think we all deserve a chance to grow beyond our mistakes, Ashley included. It was during that same visit that I found my father alone in the small room we had transformed into a library. He was flipping through an old photo album, one of those black and white ones with serrated edges that told stories of a time I didn't get to know. This one was your grandfather, he said, pointing to a tall, thin man with a rigid posture beside an old Ford. Arthur Souza, son of Portuguese immigrants who came to America with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a toolbox. I sat down beside him, interested in this family history that was rarely shared. My father had always been a man of few words, especially when it came to the past. He worked as a carpenter his whole life, he continued, turning the page to show other photographs. He built half the old houses in this town with his own hands. The house we inherited from him, the one that was sold, was the only one he built for himself, after decades of building for others. I began to understand the depth of the broken promise, the meaning of that property beyond its financial value. On his deathbed, my father continued, his voice choked with emotion. He held my hand with a strength that didn't match his frail body and said, Joseph, promise me that Carol will always have a roof over her head that belongs to her, that she will never need charity to have a place to live. It was his biggest concern, bigger even than his own death. And you promised, I completed softly. I promised. He closed the album, his wrinkled hands trembling slightly. And I failed. When the gambling debts piled up, when the loan sharks started threatening our family, I sold the only thing I had sworn to protect. Now many things made sense. The insistence on staying in that small town when he could have had better opportunities in larger centers. The refusal to accept my financial help for years, until it was presented in the specific form of a house. The transfer to Ashley, in the hope that the property would remain in the family longer through her and her children. You know what's ironic? I asked, after a few moments of reflection. The community center would probably make Grandpa proud. A house that doesn't just serve our family, but dozens of seniors who need support. My father raised his eyes, surprised by this perspective. I never thought of it that way. The promise was about security, about dignity in old age, I continued. The center provides that not just for Mom, but for many others. Maybe it's an even more meaningful way to honor his memory. A solitary tear ran down my father's aged face, quickly wiped away with the back of his hand. Men of his generation were taught that crying was weakness, that emotions should be controlled, suppressed, hidden. "Thank you, son," he said simply, placing the album back on the shelf, "for being better than me. It's not about being better, or worse, Dad, just about learning from each other's mistakes and moving forward." Ashley and I took longer to rebuild our relationship. The years of favoritism, silent competition, and finally, the betrayal with the house had created a chasm between us that seemed impossible to cross. Our encounters at the community center were cordial but distant, limited to practical and operational matters. It was on a rainy afternoon in April, almost 2.5 years after the beginning of this whole story, that she finally asked to talk to me alone. We chose the back porch, the same one where I had overheard her planning to sell the house. The rain fell gently on the roof, creating a curtain of water around us and a constant rhythm that filled the uncomfortable silences. "I've spent a lot of time trying to find the right words," she began, her eyes fixed on the rain. I rehearsed elaborate apologies, detailed explanations, justifications for my actions. But in the end, it all comes down to 2 words I don't say often. "Enough. I'm sorry." I remained silent, letting her continue at her own pace. "I've always been the problematic daughter, the one who needed more attention, more resources, more understanding," she continued, a bitter laugh escaping. "At first, it was genuine. I had health problems as a child, difficulties at school, but at some point I realized that being fragile had advantages, and I continued to play that role even after I no longer needed to. Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Because I'm tired," she replied simply. "Tired of being less than I can be, of manipulating instead of earning, of being seen as someone who constantly needs to be rescued." She finally turned to me. "And because you deserve to know that I recognize what I did, that I understand the gravity of my actions." It wasn't an instant or miraculous reconciliation. We didn't hug crying or promise to make up for lost years. It was too late for some things, too early for others, but it was a start. A seed of honesty planted in soil that for too long had only known half-truths and omissions. In the months that followed, Ashley proved with actions what she had started with words. She developed a digital literacy program for the seniors at the community center. She used her organizational talents, always pointed out by our mother, to structure fundraising events. She took on responsibilities without seeking recognition or advantages. Kevin also became more involved with the center, offering small repairs and maintenance that his experience as a mechanic allowed him to perform at no cost. The boys, my mom, nephews Peter and Lucas, became constant figures, bringing the energy and joy that only children can offer to a predominantly elderly environment. In Harrisburg, my life also flourished in new and unexpected ways. The promotion that I initially accepted as a way to escape family problems turned out to be an opportunity for genuine professional growth. My experience and ethical rigor were recognized not only within the company, but in the financial market of the state capital. Emily and I decided to move in together after a year of dating. We chose an apartment halfway between her office and my work, with a large balcony where we grew herbs and flowers. On weekends, we alternated between hosting friends for dinner and traveling to Harmony Creek, where the community center continued to thrive under the care of the reunited family. It was during one of these trips that Jessica, my ex-girlfriend, crossed my path again. She was arm in arm with a man I vaguely recognized as a teacher from the local school, carrying a baby of a few months. "Mike!" she exclaimed, genuinely surprised. "I heard you were in town, but I didn't expect to run into you." We exchanged the usual pleasantries. I introduced Emily. I met her husband and daughter. There was no resentment or embarrassment, just that distant familiarity of people who once shared intimacy and now followed completely separate lives. "I'm happy to see you well," she said as we said goodbye. "Really?" "Likewise," I replied, and I meant it. What once seemed like a devastating loss now revealed itself to be just a necessary fork in the road that brought me to where I am today. Observing the community center in full operation, with seniors playing dominoes under the trees we planted, children helping to serve afternoon snacks, My family gathered not out of obligation, but out of genuine choice. I feel a peace that once seemed impossible. It's not a story of heroes and villains, of absolute right and wrong. It's a story of imperfect people learning to love better, to forgive, to grow beyond the wounds of the past. The house I bought for my parents, which they gave to my sister because she needed it more, has transformed into something none of us had imagined. A space of healing not only for our family, but for an entire community. When people ask if I regret it, if I would have done things differently if I could go back, the answer isn't simple. I regret the pain, the misunderstandings, the time wasted in resentments. But I can't say I would change the course of events, because every difficult moment, every disappointment, and every painful discovery were necessary to get us where we are today. As an accountant, I've always believed in the bottom line, in the result that really matters after all the debits and credits are considered. And in this balance sheet of life, after all the calculations, I discovered that we gained more than we lost. On a particularly meaningful afternoon, while helping Mrs. Gable, one of the most beloved seniors at the center, write a letter to her grandson studying abroad, she made an observation that perfectly summarized this entire journey. You know, my dear, we spend our lives trying to build walls to protect ourselves, to keep what is ours. In the end, we discover that what really matters are the doors we leave open, the windows through which light enters, the paths we create to reach out to others. I looked out the window of the small room and saw my father teaching my youngest nephew to plant a young apple tree in the backyard. My mother and Emily were organizing donated books on the newly built shelf. Ashley and Kevin, holding hands discreetly, listened attentively to the stories that Mr. Henderson was telling about the time when the train station still operated in town. The house was no longer just a construction of bricks and mortar, a material asset to be disputed or transferred. It was a living, breathing place, a testament to the fact that even the greatest disappointments can turn into unexpected blessings when we choose to grow through them instead of defining ourselves by them. And I, who for so long defined myself by what I gave to others, money, time, sacrifice, finally learned to receive, to accept love, forgiveness, second chances, to understand that my worth isn't in what I can provide, but in who I am, with all my complexities and contradictions. That 12-year-old boy who watched helplessly as his grandparents' house was sold, who secretly vowed to fix his father's mistake one day, can finally rest. The cycle was broken not by the acquisition of a new property, but by the creation of something much more valuable, a legacy of healing and reconciliation that transcends walls and deeds. Next week will mark exactly 3 years since the day I discovered the transfer of the house to Ashley. 3 years that seem simultaneously like an eternity and the blink of an eye. To mark the date, not with resentment but with celebration, we're organizing a small party at the community center. It won't be anything grand, just a barbecue. In the backyard, live music with the local guitar player, games for the children and the seniors who still have a young spirit. Emily and I have our own announcement to make on the occasion. After much reflection and planning, we've decided to get married. It won't be a big event. Neither of us wants that. Just a simple ceremony with the people who really matter. And we'll also share the news that we're expecting our first child. A new life, a new beginning, free from the burdens and patterns of the past. A child who will grow up knowing they are loved for who they are, not for what they can offer or sacrifice. Last night, sitting on the balcony of our apartment in Harrisburg, Emily asked what the first lesson I would like to teach our child would be. That the value of things isn't in their price, I replied after a few moments of reflection. That material possessions are just tools, not definitions of who we are, and that true family is built not by blood or obligation, but by daily choices of love and respect. She smiled, her hand resting gently on her still discreet belly. I think he's already learning that, simply by being part of this story. Perhaps that's the greatest gift that emerged from this whole journey. The chance to transform a story of pain and injustice into a legacy of hope and renewal. To show that mistakes, even the most painful ones, don't have to define our future. That there's always a way to rebuild, to start over, to rediscover what really matters. The house I bought for my parents, which they gave to my sister because she needed it more, is no longer a source of bitterness or regret. It's just a chapter in a much larger story, a story about forgiveness, growth, and the discovery that family is much more than blood ties or shared properties. It's a daily commitment to choose love over pride, understanding over judgment, and hope over fear.